Many years ago, I went on a date with somebody who we get to the restaurant and he does all kinds of things that are not conducive to connecting with someone. Oh, you're a therapist? I don't believe in therapy. My ex-wife had borderline personality disorder, and then I married someone else and she had borderline personality disorder. Yeah. He thought the date went great and asked me out again, by the way, just so you know, like how out of touch. It's not that people aren't telling the truth, it's that they're telling the truth as they see it. So when people come to therapy, often the thing that they want to change usually is someone else or something else. And it's not that there aren't difficult people in the world. We have this saying, before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes, right? But what is your role and how are you interacting? And I think that that's really important, especially when it comes to relationships of all kinds.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Every guest we've brought onto this show has done some serious inner work. That's what makes real love possible. Therapy is a big part of that for so many of us. BetterHelp makes it simple to find a licensed therapist who fits you completely online. Visit betterhelp.com/loveready and get 10% off to get started. That's BetterHelp.com/loveready. The stories we tell ourselves often shape the way we love. Why a relationship ended, why we have not found the right person, why someone else needs to change before things can get better. These stories can feel completely true, but they are still being told through our own particular lens. Today, we have a special episode to share with you. This conversation is filmed live at the Global Love Conference in New York City, where I sat down with Lori Gottlieb to explore how the stories we carry shape the way we date, connect, and show up in our relationships. We talk about taking responsibility for our part, what it means to be ready for a relationship, the importance of flexibility, and why the beginning of a relationship is often the most important time to have the conversations we might otherwise avoid. I'm your host, Robin Ducharme, and this is Real Love Ready with Lori Gottlieb. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Can everybody hear me? Today, we are including this conversation with the great Lori Gottlieb. We talk on this series a lot about love, right? And of course, this is what we're here to do. We're here to help people find love. We all have trouble with it. It's like a human problem. Not only just sometimes we find love, we lose love. How do we keep it? How do we nurture love? You know, it's just this complex thing that as human beings, I think it's like a lifelong journey of trying to figure it out. But we're all trying to do it, especially in this room. Well, this is the second time that we've worked together. Lori was part of one of our virtual summits during COVID, and it was all about love and relationships. And our company endeavors to bring relational literacy to the world. And how do we do that? We learn from the experts like Lori Gottlieb. So this is a true blessing and an honor that I feel I have to talk to you, Lori. So thank you, sweetheart, for this.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
I'm joined today by Lori. She's a psychotherapist, best-selling author of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. What an excellent book. Love your book, Lori.
Thank you.
Which has sold over 3 million copies and is being adapted for television. The Ask the Therapist advice columnist for the New York Times and host of 2 podcasts, Dear Therapist and Since You Asked. Her TED Talk is so fantastic. How Changing Your Story Can Change Your Life has been watched nearly 8 million times. Imagine that, 8 million people, and probably more than once. She has been both a therapist and the patient, and was brave enough to write about what she found on both sides of the couch. Thank you for coming, Lori.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So, Lori, let's start with your origin story, because you started out you took a pivot from Hollywood into becoming a therapist. And I'm curious was there a moment in or an experience you went through, or like a day that you can remember, because that's a big transition from where you were in Hollywood to becoming a therapist. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I had an unusual trajectory to becoming a therapist. I was working at NBC, and for those of you who remember the show ER, anybody watch that show? It was sort of like The Pit, but a long time ago. And my job at NBC part of my job was I was working on that show. I had to go into the ER, the real ER, with our consultant on the show, who was a real ER doctor. and come up with story ideas. And his name is Joe, and Joe said to me, I think you like it better here than you like your day job, because I was so interested in the stories that people came in with, right? You come into an emergency room, you're not coming because you expected something to happen. It's an inflection point. And I was really fascinated by that. And so that was what got me to medical school. And then when I left medical school, I was writing in medical school, and I left medical school, had a full-time writing career. I still have I would call it a full-time writing career. But I also wanted to be a therapist and help people to kind of, as a writer, edit their stories as a therapist.
So you've been both a therapist and the patient. How did sitting on the other side of the couch change the way you do your work?
So it's interesting, you guys are all matchmakers, and you all have your own experiences with love and relationships. For me, I wrote about this in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, where I follow the lives of 4 of my patients, and I was just going to write about them, and then with their permission, anonymized, all of that, and then I was going through something. Actually, what I was going through was a breakup, very relevant to this room. And I went to therapy for that. And I thought, if I'm writing about them, I don't want to just be the expert up on high. And I say at the beginning of the book that my greatest credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. And so I write about my experience as the patient, going through therapy, getting over this breakup, figuring out some deeper things, and following the lives of these patients who all, in one way or another, are dealing with love.
So, your TED Talk is so great, Lori, and I watched it again this morning because I've seen it before. And you say that we're all unreliable narrators of our lives. I can see that, totally. So when a client comes in and tells you their story, how quickly can you tell where the narrative might not be as accurate as they believe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's not that people aren't telling the truth, it's that they're telling the truth as they see it. So we all see the world through our particular lens. And what we don't often see is another person's perspective, how we are being perceived in the world, how we navigate through the world. And we're very sure that we're telling this very accurate story. So, and in fact, when people come to therapy, often the thing that they want to change usually is someone else or something else, right? And it's not right. And it's very hard. It's very hard to look at ourselves that way. And it's not that there aren't difficult people in the world. We have this saying, before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes, right? So, it's like there are difficult people. But what is your role and how are you interacting? And I think that that's really important, especially when it comes to relationships of all kinds.
So we're in a room with, I think, nearly 200 matchmakers, right? Love coaches. Everything you said speaks directly to matchmakers. Usually clients come in with a story, and the real issue is almost never what they lead with. What are the top 3 stories people tell themselves about why love hasn't worked, and which one is the most dangerous?
I would say the most dangerous is it was all the other person's fault.
Yeah.
When I see couples for couples therapy, the first thing that I say to them before we even meet is I say, I want you each separately to come up with the one thing that you want to work on to be the best possible version of yourself in this relationship, regardless of whether the other person changes. So you're saying, I'm going to do everything I can to be the best version of myself because I'm going to learn about myself a lot by doing that. And that will teach me, then I can't say that, I didn't put my best effort into this. And then I can see what's really here in the relationship and what's not. Often people will say, well, no, the only reason I'm this way is because they're doing that. And if they would stop doing that, or if they would start doing that, then I would react differently. But it's not some contest about who changes first. It's you do the best version of yourself. The other person's going to do the best version of him or herself. And then you see what can happen. And I think that when, even in the dating world, when you go out on a date with someone and they say, yeah, it was all the other person's fault. And you see like this pattern of, this person was crazy and that one was crazy and this one was this. And it's kind of like, well, if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, maybe it's you. Right? We don't say that, but that's the idea is, why what is happening, then it's always the other person. Where do you sit in all of this?
Yeah. I love that approach. It's like, and you say that you have more success with couples because you can see that dynamic, right?
Yeah.
But I think the first question to ask, I just really appreciate that. Like, what is one thing, whether it's small or big, like that you want to change?
That you want to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. So when a client says, I just haven't met the right person, I haven't met them yet, what is the deeper story there?
I mean, it completely depends on where they are in their trajectory of life. I think there's a reality that as you get older, there's very low inventory. But I think for people who are younger, I would want to know how their lives are peopled, meaning like, where are they going? Where are they meeting people? Who are their friends? Who are their close relationships? What do their close relationships look like? And then the kind of deeper question, there's this sort of idea of tell me how you were loved and I'll tell you how you love now. And if you haven't processed that, we have this thing, we marry our unfinished business. And so if you are not meeting the right person, or if you're meeting people and then the relationships keep not working out, the question is, what's keeping you stuck in terms of the way that you connect and the way that you attach and the way that you love?
I thought it was really interesting what Justin Garcia was saying about how the younger generations are looking for, that right person, like all of the hierarchy of needs in one person. And like, I'm 48 years old, and I know that's not, we're educated, I think, later in age, we're not looking for all in one person. I thought that was interesting data.
Yeah, well, I think that the younger, so I have a 20-year-old, so
Yes.
I know a little bit about what they're going through, but I think there's this idea of optimizing for everything in life. That's how they grew up, is everything is optimized. You want to make life as friction-free as possible, which is not what relationships necessarily are. You and I were talking about flexibility a few minutes ago, and that they've been these studies that say that when people say, what is the quality that predicts that somebody's going to be a good partner? What is the top quality? And people would name all kinds of things, but it's actually flexibility. How flexible is that person? Because rigidity does not do well in relationships. And we all know, whether we are rigid or we've been with a rigid person, it does not work that well in a relationship. I think that what's interesting is that when people say like, oh, my partner is my best friend, and it's like, no, you actually have a best friend, and her name is, Julie or whatever, right? And so it's like we think we need everything in that person, but that makes a relationship really hard. So that might be, your partner might be someone that you feels like a best friend, but that's not your only best friend, right? Like, you have other people, and there are things that you don't go to your partner with because talking to your friend about it is actually a different kind of conversation. We have to realize that we are limited, our partners are limited, and so it's really about like what do you enjoy about this person without trying to make them be everything that you feel like you need in your life. We need lots of people in our lives. We need all different kinds of people in our lives.
So I had two questions to follow up with what you just said, Lori. First is going back to flexibility. How would somebody determine if somebody was rigid or flexible? Like, what are some indicators of rigidity? Or would it be, you would have to have a lot of conversation with this person to figure out if they're rigid or if they have flexibility, they're capable of having flexibility in their minds.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between what people say and what people do. And so it's really important to pay attention to what people do, because that tells you who they are. So they can say whatever they want to say, but, they might say, well, no, I'm, however they describe themselves, but then you watch them in real life and they're not like that at all. You can see it early on, rigidity when, how they are at the restaurant. Are they very demanding? Are they, if something doesn't go right at the restaurant or something, like, do they roll with it? Do they have a sense of humor about it, which is really important? Do they get frustrated easily? Those are not good traits to have in a relationship. They're hard to work with.
Yeah. So what is the difference between someone who is genuinely ready to be in a relationship and someone who just thinks they are?
I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I went on a date with somebody who told the person who set us up that he was very ready for a relationship. This is what he wanted. We had a good phone conversation. We get to the restaurant and he does all kinds of things that are not conducive to connecting with someone. So things like, oh, you're a therapist? I don't believe in therapy. Okay, I don't think everybody needs to go to therapy, but it was such a kind of like a push you away challenge. Oh, my ex-wife had borderline personality disorder, and then I married someone else and she had borderline personality disorder. Oh, and by the way, I had a really traumatic childhood and I've never needed therapy, so I don't understand why people need to go to This is the conversation at dinner. This is a person who says to the person who set us up, I really want a relationship. I'm really ready for that. To me, it was like, you don't I think it's outside of his awareness. He thought the date went great and asked me out again, by the way, just so you know, like how out of touch. So I think that when people think that they're ready for a relationship, but they act, again, looking at behavior, what are they doing that says, if you're interested in someone and you're on a date with them, this is not how you act if you want a relationship. So I think it was a self-protective mechanism, and we all do that. We protect ourselves in all these different ways. We judge the other person prematurely. Nobody's good enough. There are all kinds of ways that people who say they want a relationship but actually have some trepidation around it or some hesitancy act. And I think that as matchmakers, it's when you ask somebody, what happened in your earlier relationships? It's a really good kind of litmus test to understand more about their readiness. How do they talk about it? Do they say, well, partly it was the other person, or partly it was me, and here's some things that I learned from the relationship, and here's what I'm looking for, and it gave me this clarity? Or, do they seem like they're impossible to please? Because that just means that they really probably don't want there's no human being who could meet those criteria, and therefore they don't have to be in a situation where they could have a relationship.
Yeah. So let's talk about ghosting. What is actually happening psychologically in the person who ghosts? And why does it hurt so disproportionately?
Yeah.
Even when the relationship is short, right? I mean, it does hurt, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're the one doing it, like why? What is that all about? You're just afraid.
Well, I think it hurts because people want closure, and I think what they want is they want just to be valued and respected. Yeah. The reason people ghost, and people who come to see me for therapy all the time talk about this. The reason that they ghost is because, ironically, they're afraid of hurting someone's feelings, and yet they don't realize how much it hurts the other person by ghosting them. It hurts so much more to be ghosted than it does to be told, hey, you know what? I really enjoyed meeting you. I don't think this is a match, right?
Exactly.
But again, I think that speaks to, again, their attachment style. And I think sometimes, like the people that I see in my practice, they take it so personally because they think it's a comment on them. Like, why wasn't I worthy enough to get a message saying this? And I think it's like, this person was not worthy of you. This person can't communicate well. This person doesn't know how to say a difficult thing in a kind way, so they just avoid. And do you really want to be with an avoidant person?
Yeah, I think it's just also, you feel like, why didn't they pick me? That sense of like, why, first is the ghosting, which is like, oh, that's so rude, beyond rude.
I think the picking me thing,
not picking you, but you know what I'm saying. It's
no, I do. And I think that that's an important point, because I think that, it's hard when you like someone and they don't reciprocate in the same way. But I think what people do is they go global with it. Like, well, this person didn't like me at all. And, we went out for a month and they didn't like me at all. No, they did, because they wouldn't have gone out with you for a month. But you weren't, for whatever reason, the right match for this person. That doesn't mean there was something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that, you're unlovable. It just means that out of all of the humans on the earth, this was not the right connection for the rest of your lives. But it doesn't mean all the things that you make it out to mean. And I think because dating is so hard and it can be so painful, that a lot of times people then feel this, not just the rejection that just happened, but all of the rejections, or even if they've rejected people, sort of all of the relationships that have not worked out in the past take on the weight of this one person not working out because they got their hopes up, they dated for a month or whatever, and then it's like, oh, it didn't work out. And so it's kind of this cumulative thing of, it's not just this one thing that I'm reacting to, it's these many things that I'm reacting to. And I think as matchmakers, it's helpful to talk people through that, to be able to say, look, this one didn't work out. There's going to be one at a certain point. You don't need 10 people, you need one person. And the other ones haven't worked out yet, but you're learning and you're growing, and let's move on.
And I love the way that you frame just changing our stories, changing the narrative, right? So all these people you met before, they were part of your story.
Yeah.
And you're the hero. You're not the victim in the story, you are the hero. So somehow reframing it.
Yeah, and I also think that question when people get rejected, sort of like, what's wrong with me? Or your question, why didn't they pick me? It's really this question of match. And I think people need to understand that it's not a judgment on who you are as a person or your value or your appeal or your attractiveness. People go through these relationships for so long. These people who, they come to therapy and they say, oh, I'm not really sure, this person seems ambivalent, or they love bomb and then they disappear. There's all these different things. You don't want to stick around for that. It's either like you're mutually invested in progressing in this relationship, or you're not mutually invested in progressing in the relationship. But there's no point in wasting time on either end. If you're ambivalent, don't waste the other person's time. And if the other person is ambivalent, or they're kind of, they're love bombing, but then they disappear, or all the different things that happen, why would you waste your time with that? You want to be, the easy part of a relationship is we are both really interested in each other. Yes. That's the easy part. The harder part is then, how do we deal with difficulties that come up? How do we communicate? How do we deal with all of the kind of, topics that are a little harder, like money and in-laws and sex and whatever. But the easy part is we're both really into this.
You know what? I really like that, because one of my questions was, what behaviors early in dating are people most likely to rationalize away and really shouldn't? But I think you just answered that question in a really solid way. It's like, first of all, you want to know that you're each into each other, right? And you're making all the efforts to show that and communicate that. What would you say are other behaviors that it's just like, actually, those are red flags?
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that relationships are like cement, which means that the cement dries quickly, but in the beginning of a relationship, the cement is still wet. It hasn't settled yet. So if there's something that doesn't sit right with you, or that you feel like, oh, I don't really, I should mention something about it, but I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to be difficult, or I don't want to, do anything too early. That's a mistake. Early on is when the cement is still wet, when you can say, when I didn't hear from you for 3 days, I was wondering what was going on, and, what was happening for you. You can bring that up, right? Or I like this kind of level of communication. What do you like?
Exactly.
As opposed to just, oh, well, then you don't bring it up, and then the person doesn't even know it's a problem. An example from one of my clients was, she said, she doesn't like people who are late. She doesn't like people who leave her waiting. That was sort of something that she had in her history. And so she was dating this new guy. She was very excited about him. But every time they had dinner plans during the week, he would come late. And she said, oh, I don't want to say anything, but I just think I should break up with him because he doesn't respect my time, and I don't feel like he respects me. And I said, why don't you ask him about it? Why don't you find out what's going on? She said, I don't want to seem like I'm demanding. If he doesn't know to show up on time, and it happens all the time, right? So I said, just ask him, just out of curiosity, in a non-judgmental way. Just say, hey, I noticed that I'm waiting. I sort of feel like, I don't like waiting like that. Can you, what's going on? And he said, she said, I don't feel like you value me. And he said, that is so the opposite of what's happening. He said, my boss does not like me to leave work, and you like to eat dinner at this time. And I, because I value you so much, was trying to have dinner when you wanted instead of really late, because you have to wake up early. So I was trying to honor your schedule by doing this, but sometimes I just can't leave. So he was actually really into her and really trying to, be kind to her. And so once they had that conversation, it was like, oh, okay, well then, yeah, we can have dinner a little bit later, or maybe on a weeknight we do something different, right? And they worked it out and they're still together. So, and they're very happy, but she would have broken up with him about this. So the cement was wet. She had a conversation. Now it could have gone a different way, where he said, oh, I don't know what your problem is, and why are you so rigid, right, about time? And that would have been a different information for her to kind of make an assessment about.
It sounds to me like, it's so much about communication. It's so much about just being honest, right? And it's scary to have those hard conversations, but you have to have them. Throughout the relationship, dating and, right?
But about the cement, if you don't bring it up, then what happens is 6 months into the relationship, someone says, I'm so upset about X, whatever it is. And the person says, really? That's been going on the whole time we've been together. I had no idea that bothered you. So that's why, and then they have no idea that this behavior has been bothering the other person.
So what is the most common reason couples end up in your office? And could it have been caught earlier?
A lot of couples come to me not because they're having problems before they get married, because they want to learn how to talk about certain things. You can't foresee everything that's going to happen, but they want to learn, how do we talk about these things that feel really tender and kind of tricky to talk about. So a lot of them come before, which I think is great. And people say to them, oh my gosh, you're going to couples therapy before you get married. This is never going to last. No, it's going to last. It has a better chance of lasting because you're coming in to talk about these things. Like family issues, how they handle money, if they want children, what's that going to look like, who's going to work, who's going to make money, what's going to happen. Really important to kind of understand where the other person comes from, because there's this assumption that, oh, we love each other and everything's great and we're getting married and we're just going to agree on all of these things, and you have no idea. So I think that's one case. But in other cases, couples come in because they have been reacting to each other in ways that cause the other person to feel unloved, unseen, unimportant.
I'm curious if you have older couples that are dating, that are considering remarriage, and they're not having a lot of problems. And so what are those questions that you're asking them, that you're guiding them to, solidify a better connection? And what could matchmakers ask their clients?
I think with older people who are dating, let's say middle-aged and older, they have established, generally they have kids, they have exes, maybe they're widowed. There's a lot of tricky stuff about integrating your lives. When do you introduce to the children? How comfortable do you feel about that? Does the person get along with their ex? What does that look like? Where do you live? Because people now have flexibility. It's different because when you're younger, you're creating the life together. And when you're in middle age, you have created a life. And now you have two lives that are pretty set in stone in a lot of ways. And then, how do you merge those lives?
You were talking about kids. And so when do you think it's okay to introduce, somebody you're dating to kids? And when can it be too early?
People like these hard and fast rules, and there are none. But I think it's really important to understand. It depends on the ages of the kids. It depends on how much the kids are aware that you're dating. It depends on how serious you think this relationship is. It's a lot of different factors. So it depends on you and your family and your relationship with your kids and their relationship with you as a human who dates, as opposed to just mom or dad. But I think it's important to not be impulsive. There are a lot of people who say oh, we've been dating for 2 months and or less. and so, it's just easier if they know who the person is, but then the kids are exposed to a lot of different people potentially. So you got to be thoughtful about it. Also, talk to the person you're dating. Sometimes it might be okay for you and your kids and your family. Say your kids are grown and you're oh, my kids don't care. They know I'm dating. But the other person's I'm not ready to meet your 22-year-old kids or your 25-year-old kids yet, right? So don't assume that just because you're ready and your adult children are ready, that the other person feels ready to meet your family.
That is such a good point, Lori. That's great. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp, and I'm genuinely grateful for their partnership in this show. One of the things I keep thinking about is the way we love is not fixed. It's not determined by our past, our parents, or every relationship that didn't work out. We actually get to change. We get to grow. But that just doesn't happen on its own. It takes intention. It takes honesty. It takes a lot of self-reflection. And for a lot of us, it takes having someone to walk us through it. Therapy has been a part of my own growth in such a fundamental way. And what I love about BetterHelp is that it's designed for real life. You fill out a short questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can connect with them online whenever it works for you. If Real Love Ready has meant something for you, and you're ready to do a little more of the work on yourself, I think BetterHelp is a great place to start. Go to betterhelp.com/loveready for 10% off. That's BetterHelp.com/loveready. So let's talk about AI in relationships, because I know Esther Perel, she's like, I've got clients and they're having like full-on relationships with clients. And I don't know if that's your experience too, Laurie. As industry professionals, what should matchmakers know about the impact of AI on relationships? And what should they be paying attention to right now?
So I saw this statistic recently that said that 72% of Gen Z has an online companion. 72%. I thought that was one of the saddest things I had heard in a very, very long time.
That's a lot. That's really high.
And right. And so I think it's, we can't ignore the fact that these are people who are dating. We can't ignore the fact that AI is in people's lives. The question is, how are they using it? And where can it be helpful, and where does it get in the way of actual connection? I actually, on our podcast, we got a question recently where this was a woman who's married, said, I'm a speech pathologist and my husband is a software engineer. And when we're in the middle of like a disagreement, he goes to AI and AI kind of scripts his whole side of this thing. And she said, what she said, like, he thinks is very useful because AI actually really does understand me and actually has really good responses, much better than he would. But I would prefer that he get it wrong and we muddle through it together.
Yes.
And I thought that was so important, that it's not about like having the perfect response. It's about, like learning about each other. And if he, as a software engineer, and maybe he's a little spectrumy, sometimes, people have trouble like finding the other person's perspective or articulating what they're trying to say. One suggestion that we made was you could have the conversation, see how it goes. And then if you want, you could go on the AI together and sort of talk together to the AI. Like, I'm trying to say this is what I'm feeling. How are you feeling? Oh, and then maybe the AI can help facilitate the conversation the way that maybe a therapist would. But it's not a replacement for your side of the conversation. And I think that that's important because you don't want to go to AI every time you don't know, you feel a little bit uncomfortable with something or you don't know exactly how to handle something. You want to learn from the AI, go into it as you, and maybe you get it wrong, maybe you get some of it right, and then you maybe learn more from the AI.
I was watching you on a podcast once, Laurie, and it was, you were talking about a client in your office, and she was in her 20s, and she was telling you about the story of this discussion she was having with her person she was dating, and she was like, her hands are in the air going, and he said this,
yes.
And I said this, and you're like, what are you doing? And it was like all through text, and so I imagine, like, this is going on way more than it used to.
Yes.
I mean, back in the day, I didn't have cell phones when I was younger and that's a whole other thing, right? But now people are using AI to form full-on conversations, and it's like that's the relationship, right? Texting and very little in person, a lot less in person.
A lot of the harder conversations are happening on text because they kind of don't bring it up when they're together, and then someone texts something that, like somebody doesn't respond well to, and then they get into a whole thing that they should have had that conversation in person, and they're going back and forth, and then people bring in the entire text thread to therapy. I'm talking about individuals, not couples, right? And they're like, see? And they'll say, like, I put the text into AI, and AI says I'm right. So, with so much to unpack there. So first of all, it's like, what did you learn about your side of it? What are you, and like, instead of having the text thing go, I find sometimes the text conversations are helpful because I'm actually hearing how they interact, and they think, well, listen to, I sound so good in this text exchange, and I want you, my therapist, to hear how good I was in this text exchange. And I'm hearing it and I'm like, huh. Maybe, there's a different way. You weren't trying to win something here. This wasn't about winning. It was about, you were so intent on telling the other person why you were justified in feeling the way you're feeling, instead of being curious about why what you were doing was harmful to them, or was hurtful to them, or made them upset.
So is technology making us better or worse at the actual vulnerability required for real love?
Let me just say something about vulnerability more generally. Like, let's say I have a couple come in, and often it'll be, let's say, the wife who says, we're here because I feel really disconnected. I want to connect more deeply with you. I feel like we're growing apart. I want to know what's going on inside of you, right? And let's say that the guy then starts talking about that in the safety of this room. And let's say he tears up a little bit, or let's say he chokes up, let's say he cries. She will inevitably have a reaction that is sort of like a deer in the headlights. Like, I don't like it when you don't share with me because I don't feel safe and I don't feel connected. But when you're this vulnerable with me, I also don't feel safe because I have this cultural programming that you're supposed to be like the rock and the solid one. And, I'm the one who has, who kind of breaks down, right? And it's not articulated. It's not something that she even thought about before she came in and said, I want to get closer to you. And I see that when I have men come into therapy, and they'll say at some point when they're telling me something, I've never told anyone this before. And they're kind of shy about it. They laugh about it a little bit. And then they tell me the thing, right? By the way, sometimes it's like something women would discuss at lunch, but men are like, they can't talk to anybody about it. But often it's deeper. And they really have not told a soul, even if they have a good marriage and family members they're close to and good friends. When women say that, if they say in therapy, I've never told anyone this before, then they'll say, except for my mother, my sister, my best friend. Yeah. They've told like a couple people, one at least. There's rarely, like, they haven't told a soul. And so I think when it comes to vulnerability, we really have to make sure that we aren't bringing that cultural programming. Either, men aren't bringing it into their relationships, but women aren't also bringing it into the relationships where without saying anything, they're creating an environment where men feel like, oh, I can't really be vulnerable with this person because she will not respond well to that.
We were in Boston yesterday, and we met with Terry Real, and he has worked with men for much of his career. And what he said was how vulnerability, it was like when he was growing up, vulnerability was absolutely not acceptable. Like, he was not allowed to be vulnerable. Yeah. And it was, he was bullied for it in his family and schoolyard, everything. And so he says, as the world is changing and boys and men are, learning about the harm of patriarchy, and if they're willing to do the work, he's like, it is monumental. And so for women to understand that, have compassion for that, even though I understand that there is this, it's been programmed, right? There's a lot of harm, but it's also asking a lot of your partner, like that story you just told. It's like that man is being vulnerable, and it's like, it's tender.
Yeah, well, I saw that just raising a boy. I remember when he was little, and if he or his friends like fell off the jungle gym or got hurt or something happened, people would just say, oh, shake it off, stand up, shake it off, right? And the girls, they'd be like, oh, honey, are you okay? Come here, do you need a hug? And so it starts so early that, a boy's body and a girl's body, just as much pain from falling off the jungle gym or falling down and skinning their knee or whatever happened. But we teach them, they get that message so early, like, oh, I can't cry. The girls can, but I can't.
So let's talk, there's so many clients matchmakers work with that aren't starting from scratch. They're starting over. And that's a completely different journey, right? So whether it's divorce, a long-term relationship ending, or just years of being on your own, starting over comes with its own particular kind of weight. And for parents, it's even more complicated. How does someone who's been in survival mode as a single parent actually make space emotionally, not just logistically, for someone new?
I think for a lot of people in that situation, the logistical piece is often harder than the emotional piece. I think a lot of people really want that emotional connection. But I think, I'll use the example of someone who, let's say that their spouse died. I think we have to understand that the people that you're dating at that age, they have a whole other life that you were not a part of. And that life is meaningful to them, that it informs who they are. It's not something to be erased. I think when you're like 25 and you meet someone and, they had like an ex, you're like, oh, I don't want the ex-girlfriend around or whatever, right? Yeah. Which, by the way, if they're friends, they're friends. It shouldn't be a problem. But I think it's easier to say like, that was history. So, right? I think when you have been through, decades with somebody else, or whatever experiences you've had a whole life. Yeah. And so I see people who come to me and they say, I met this woman, and like a guy will come in, I met this woman and, her husband died and she still has pictures of him in the house. And I don't understand that. We've been dating for a year and I don't understand why every time I come over, I need to see pictures of her and her husband. It's like, do you have any understanding of this is part of her? This is not a part to be erased. This is not a part to be like, we're just gonna like burn it in the fireplace. This is a really important part of the woman you love and who she is. And the same with an ex-husband or an ex-wife, like whatever their relationship is, whether it's acrimonious or it's amiable, doesn't matter. Like this is an important part of their life. And so the tricky part of getting together at this stage of life is that you have to be able to integrate the person's history, because it is their present actually in a lot of ways, into your relationship. Yes. And the people who really do well with that have these beautiful relationships, understanding the entirety of each other. And they feel so seen and understood, and it doesn't feel threatening that they had and have another life that exists outside of this later in life relationship.
Yeah. That's what comes down to the flexibility and being able to be curious and open. Because I think it can be, you could feel threatened. Right? But it's not about that. It's like you're joining somebody in their life's journey later on when they already have a full life.
Yeah. But I think that for a lot of people who, again, they dated in their 20s, they got married in their 20s, they're not used to the fact that the presence of someone from the person's past is an integral part of who they are. Yeah. Back then it was like, it was just, some, early 20s kind of dating.
So what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes newly divorced people make when they start dating again?
I would just say making a lot of assumptions about that the other person feels the same way about relationships, marriage, children who are maybe a little bit older, all the things that you and your ex took for granted. Right? Like you guys had whatever your household looked like, that was the culture of your household. And this other person that you're meeting, they had a whole different culture in their household. And so, I think people kind of disagree, or they don't realize that the other person is different from them. And by the way, if you meet in your 20s, you have to realize this about another person. Difference is important. This is something that we talk about a lot in couples therapy, that you are not the same person. And sometimes people say, I can't believe this person that I love so much believes this or thinks this. Well, they do, because they're a separate person. But I think it gets amplified when it's later in life and you've had this entire other culture of an adult household that you created, and they had an entire other culture of an adult household that they created. And then now, how do you talk about, well, what does this look like with the two of us and our families and what we're bringing to it?
I love that. I think it's so much about like discovering in the dating process, right? And what are the beliefs? Those are really important questions. And do you share, what values do you share? What values are different? Because I think belief systems, I really like what you said there. Like with your past partner, you had a whole culture, of course. Yeah. And with this new person, you don't know, right? Until really you have to discover that.
And also, what is your role in each other's families?
Right.
So, when you were with another person, everybody knew what the roles were. They were very clear. What does it mean that you're in a romantic relationship with someone? What is your relationship like with the rest of that family, whether it's siblings of the person you're dating, whether it's their parents, whether it's their children, and there's no rule about this. It's just, how do you guys talk about that? Do you feel aligned?
So you mentioned your son, and I'd really like to talk about the next generation in dating, like people that are younger, like in their 20s, and they're looking for maybe their life partner. What are we getting wrong about how we prepare boys for relationships?
I think part of it is just the generational, both boys and like everybody, is this idea of, teaching them what relationships really are, especially growing up in the age of AI, and in the age of apps and ghosting and swiping. And, they don't have a lot of experience with, they have, again, even breakups, is just like, they're going to text somebody and say like, you know what, this isn't working out after a year on text. and that just floors me, but that's what happens. Yeah. So I think just teaching them about relationships and modeling for them good, healthy relationships and being available to them, which is different from being invasive. So being available is like, if you have any questions or you just want to chat about something, or just like, how's it going with so-and-so, that you're dating. And especially with boys, not making eye contact when you ask these questions, because that sometimes they feel like, oh, that feels a little bit too much. So, maybe you're in the car, maybe you're kind of walking somewhere, maybe you're kind of like cooking in the kitchen, just, kind of giving them enough space that they feel comfortable beginning to talk about things. Women are much more like, I need to see you in order to feel like I'm connected in this conversation. And, young, boys and young men are more about like, I'll just look over here and let me tell you what's happening. Yeah. Right.
Are you finding that there is less dating going on? I've got a 19-year-old, mm-hmm. and I've got a 16-year-old. And my 16-year-old, there's hardly anybody dating. She's in grade 11. I'm shocked, to tell you the truth. But my 19-year-old, now she's in university, there's definitely more dating. But are you seeing that? You've got a 20-year-old son.
Yeah. I think that there are more what they call situationships, where people don't want to say they're dating, so they don't define it. They just, they're doing what they're doing, and nobody's talking about, well, what are we doing here? And I think that a lot of young women are afraid to ask, like, what are we doing here? Because they don't want to appear sort of disempowered or needy. But it's really important for you to understand, is this what you want? You have to know what it is before you know whether it's what you want. What is this? What are we actually doing here? And it's okay if the guy is like, oh, no, I don't want that. Then good. You don't waste your time if you don't want that, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's important that we teach them that it's okay to clarify. It's okay to have conversations about things, to understand whether you're aligned in what you want. And not to just kind of go along because you think that that's your only option.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is to like that, well, nobody asked that. That's what I hear a lot from young people who come to me. They're, well, I can't ask that. Nobody asked that. Like, they're going to think I'm weird if I ask that. Well, if you're not aligned, then what do you care what they think about you?
Fantastic. So we're just going to have a few more questions about infidelity and cheating. Fun, right?
I'll just say I write the New York Times advice column. It's called Ask the Therapist. And I would say one of the more common questions we get is about infidelity and cheating.
Yes.
So I think people don't know how to talk about it, and they don't want to tell anyone in their own lives that it's happening. Or that it happened, and so they write to a total stranger. That would be me or whoever else they write to. And I think it's so interesting that we feel like, even though it's so common, people feel so much shame around it.
Exactly. So I guess that's one of the questions. Is cheating always a symptom of something broken, or can it happen in a good relationship?
I think that people don't understand that there are so many different circumstances under which it happens, that often it happens when there's some kind of loss, like a parent dies and the person feels like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die too. And it's not even it's outside of their awareness often. But they kind of feel like I have to, someone presents themselves to them, like at work or they meet someone, and without realizing the connection between, I just lost my parents, and it brought up all this death anxiety in me, and there's this person who's alive and I don't feel alive anymore. And so, that kind of thing. Sometimes it happens that way, or some kind of loss, like, after, and let's say they went through an illness and then they recovered. And then they realized, wow, I don't have a lot of time, because it kind of woke them up. You see a lot of infidelity in those situations of some kind of loss. And sometimes it's that the person, they feel like there's something that they're not able to say in the marriage. When they try to talk to the other person shuts them down. What do you mean? We're happy. I don't know what you're talking about. We're so happy. And, or they shut them down, like, well, think of how lucky we are. Why are you upset about that? Right? So they kind of minimize or dismiss, and then the person just feels completely shut down. I'm not condoning cheating, by the way. I'm just explaining the circumstances under which it often happens.
Yeah. So, Lori, what would you say is one myth about love that we collectively need to unlearn right now?
I think love is, people think it's this feeling, like I'm in love with this person. And I think that love is when a woman said to me recently, she said, I'm dating this guy and I really respect him. And I realized that I didn't really respect some of the people that I dated in the past. So I think it's about how much you respect and value the person's, what we call, we had our Jewish matchmaker here before, neshama. A neshama is like your essence or your soul, right? It's that you are drawn to that person's neshama. You're drawn to the essence of who they are, which means they're not perfect, they're flawed, they have annoying habits, they don't always understand you, but when there's a rupture, they will repair it with you. Which is so important. It's not whether rupture is going to happen, it's how do you repair it. So can they do rupture and repair with you? Do they try to understand something outside of maybe their comfort zone? Do they avoid, or do they come toward you when there's a problem? Right. But ultimately, it's, we're drawn to each other's essence so much, to this neshama, to this person, who they are, that we're willing to do things that are difficult to maintain this very strong connection that we have.
That's beautiful. Okay, we have time for questions. Who's got questions for Lori?
Hi.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your work. I'm Vanessa from Matchmaking Manila. My question would be, what can you say about intuition? Do we really know when we know?
So again, going back to the Terry Reel's comment, we marry our unfinished business, that sometimes intuition or chemistry is, this feels familiar. And, not in the way that you want as an adult. So if it feels familiar because you had this loving experience growing up and you felt mostly kind of good about who you were, and you felt like people around you were on your side, and, all of that, then, what you'll hear tomorrow, or unless it was today, the securely attached, about attachment, then this feels familiar is great. Trust your intuition. But a lot of people didn't have secure attachment growing up, and a lot of people who are coming to matchmakers might not have. And even the parents who call Rachel, and who probably called a bunch of you as well, they may think that their children they don't understand, why is my child not found their person? They don't understand that maybe the parent is very, very loving, but maybe they were intrusive or overbearing or neglectful, or who knows. And so when you grow up and you get into a relationship, what feels familiar to you is what we initially call chemistry. And so it's really important that if you notice with your clients that they have a pattern, and this is how you can bring it up with them, you seem to feel connected to or drawn to these kind of people who continuously disappoint you in whatever way. It turns out that, it seemed like they were this way, but actually they're this way, because unconsciously you were drawn to that thing that they were maybe not showing. They were very charming, but underneath it, they had that quality that felt familiar. So you want to point that out. Like I noticed that in these last 3 relationships or these 3 people I set you up with, that this is what happened. You were drawn to this or you were not drawn. Here, I gave you 3 people who are exactly what you say you're drawn to. And yet you came away saying, no, my intuition says no, or I'm not drawn to them, or there's no chemistry. Well, what's that about? So in my book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, there's a young woman that one of the 4 patients that I follow, I call her Charlotte in the book. And she keeps going out with the same kind of guy, different package, but same kind of underlying emotional makeup. And saying, well, all men are this way, or men are, whatever she says about them. And then when she goes out with like someone who's exactly what she is looking for in terms of emotional presence, emotional generosity, stability. And it's not even about she's not attracted physically, like cute guy. Just like, yeah, I don't know, no chemistry. So then, so what we had to work on was, why is it that you feel no chemistry with these guys that are actually available to you? And why is it that you feel this incredible chemistry with people who are not available to you in the ways that you want them to be? It's because it's safer to be with the unavailable person than to have to be vulnerable with the available person who you will have to show up for too, because he's going to expect it, because he's securely attached. Hi.
I'm just curious about your view when it comes to dating after divorce. So I get a lot of people that are like recently divorced and they want to hire a matchmaker right away. Do you think it's healthier to tell them to wait and they should date for 6 months or a year before they come to me? I actually recently had a client that was technically still married, but she said it was a bad choice or a bad decision. She was married for a very short period of time and she found out that he was abusive and he was an alcoholic, and so ultimately she was not officially divorced, but she insisted on hiring me. She's a great client and she has gone out with pretty much everyone that I presented to her, and she's had 2nd, 3rd, 4th dates, but...
And then what happens?
Yeah, nothing sticks, right? There's always going to be a reason. She actually went on 7 dates with somebody that we matched her with, and there's always a reason, and I don't know.
What was the reason? I'm just curious, what was the reason for this after 7 dates? Just to get a sense of this person?
It was more just no connection. She gave it a shot, she gave it a chance. But I feel like there's something deeper happening, and it's really hard to approach the topic with her just because she, of course feels like she's really ready, but I'm not convinced. Just wondering about your view on
no,
this.
that's such an important question. I think that when a new potential client comes to you, the assessment is critical. And I understand that you have this line between like, I want to bring on a client who seems like they might be a good client, and at the same time, what does it mean to be a good client? Because you want to make sure that you're picking sort of people who are definitely looking for the kind of people that you're going to set them up with. And usually that's relationship-oriented people who want to find a real connection. When this woman came to you and said, by the way, there are situations where, someone is separated, but they've been separated for 3 years in divorce proceedings and legal stuff and whatever, they might be very ready. So you have to do the assessment. It sounds like, when she says, it was very quick and he was an alcoholic and abusive, all kinds of flags are going off for me. Like, a lot of people would say, oh, that's so sad, I'm so sorry, right? But it's like, what was it in you that made you pick someone who was, and I'm not blaming, this is not victim blaming or anything like that. It's about, you were drawn to this person enough that you married this person. So what was going on for you? And if she has some awareness of that, like maybe she's learned something really crucial to her own, what's going on with her own sort of emotional connection system that is going to be useful for her going forward. But if you haven't heard that from her, which sounds like you haven't asked, but if you were to say to her like, wow, I've set you up with a lot of people. It sounds like there are some people that, you go back to and you have some connection to, and then you seem not to. I think it would be so much more helpful for me to find the right person for you if I could understand more about a little bit of your history. That will help me find better matches for you that will be more compatible for you in the long term. Tell me a little bit about, I'm so sorry this happened to you in this last relationship. Before I set you up with someone new, maybe it would be helpful to and you can suggest like to think about that more. There's some books, you can recommend some books to her. You could maybe see a therapist, and then because I think we'll have more success, and I don't want to make you go on all these dates that are going to be exhausting for you.
So I loved what you said about men's vulnerability, and something that I see a lot in coaching men is kind of this all or nothing form of vulnerability. Like, men have spent their whole lives being told you're allowed to be happy or angry, and that is it. And so they have all of these emotions that have just been stored up and they don't share with anybody. And then they'll start a relationship and be not sharing, and then they'll finally feel like loved and safe and explode emotion all over their partner. And then it inevitably doesn't work out, and they kind of have this like, see, I was right, it is wrong and shameful, and everybody will hate my emotions, and I should never share them again. And so I end up working a lot with them on how do you share in a way that's effective and connected with your partner. But something that I struggle with a lot is getting them over that reinforcement that they've had from their experience and from society. And so I was wondering what your advice would be about how to get them to be willing and ready to be in a place where they're able to open up again to people and feel like they can really see people accepting that part of themselves and not just have the skills to be able to do it.
One of the things that I like to say to anyone who is worried about opening up is choose your audience well. And by that I mean that people will say, see, I opened up to this person and it wasn't received well. And then they don't want to do it again. And that's not necessarily because you opened up. It's because that person doesn't know how to receive vulnerability. I'm not talking about, by the way, when they kind of just like trauma dump all over you. But, just like being open and being a person who has feelings and is human. So I think it's helpful to kind of talk through, how do you know when you're choosing your audience well? How do you know when this is a person who is available to that kind of real, honest, candid, safe relationship? By the way, being vulnerable, it has just like trust. It happens in small stages. It's built over time. People say, oh, I totally trust that person, and you've known them for 3 weeks. How do you totally trust that person? You don't know each other yet. You may come to really trust each other, but it's in action, again, not in words. So, what are the experiences that you have together, or the ways in which you've seen that person act in the world that makes you feel like that's a trustworthy person? And then, they might share with you too. It's not a one-way street. Vulnerability goes both ways. How are you both talking to each other? How much do you share with each other? Does the person prematurely share all this stuff and you feel sort of overwhelmed and flooded by it? That's not an invitation to then open up and share everything about your life too. These are just relational skills that I think, because of social media, a lot of younger people don't understand. It feels very all or nothing to younger people. Either I don't share or I share everything. But it's really important to tell people this is something that you test out, and every time it's a little experiment and you see how it goes.
Wow. Thank you, Lori Gottlieb.
Thank you all. This has been so great.
The Real Love Ready series is a Soul Print Media production, presented by BetterHelp, hosted by me, Robin Ducharme. Executive producers, Robin Ducharme, John Kim, Tara Malhotra Feinberg, Hilary Swanson. Senior producer, Miriam Debbie Talbot. Producers, Tara Malhotra Feinberg and Maya Anstey. Directed by Miriam Debbie Talbot. Edited by Susie Landers O'Connell. Production coordinator, Leah Schultz. Post sound mixing, Christian Deutsch.